Amen. Proverbs chapter 17. Verse 1. Solomon writes, "Better is a dry morsel with quietness than a house full of feasting with strife." We've come across proverbs like this before, in which you see what is contrasted here is quietness with strife, or peace with conflict in other proverbs. And he's using here a dry morsel with quietness. Some other translations say just a dry crust of something that's not very appetizing, something that perhaps even a poor person would eat, but it's with quietness. He says that's better than a house full of feasting in which you have all of this food, all of this great stuff to eat, but it's a house full of strife. And how many families can you say that America is filled with, that they might have plenty to eat, and they got the money to feast? They don't have quietness. They don't have peace. They don't have that tranquility, that inner tranquility of peace with God, peace with one another. But they've got a lot of things they can feast upon. Whereas you have someone who is poor, doesn't have a lot to eat. It's not a gourmet meal by any means. And they don't make a lot of money, but there's quietness there. Contentment there. So you see the quietness and is contrasted with the strife in this passage of Scripture. Look at verse 2. "A wise servant will rule over a son who causes shame, and will share an inheritance among the brothers." In ancient cultures, you would have a slave or a servant, and some of those slaves or servants would be very close to the family, so much so that they could even receive inheritance. And oftentimes they did. And Solomon is saying here that if you have a wise servant, the master is going to treat that servant as though he is one of his own sons, over a son that causes shame. This servant will be someone who, of course, will serve well, will be faithful, will be responsible. And a wise slave will rule over the master's shameful son and will share in the inheritance. So there is where wisdom is used to show that a person can have favor even in a situation like this and receive blessings, whereas the rightful heir of the inheritance is behaving shamefully and won't partake of it. And in ancient cultures, sometimes servants are like that. They would become so very close to the family that they would even receive part of the inheritance of the master when he dies. And you got a shameful son that's acting and behaving contrary to the will of God. You don't want your inheritance to go to that individual. They're going to be like the prodigal son is going to go out and waste it, like Luke 15 talks about. They're going to waste the inheritance. And so a wise servant in a family is better than a shameful son. And there is a blessing upon that in this situation. Look at verse 3. "The refining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the hearts." Fire tests the purity of silver and gold. That's how the dross is taken out of silver and gold. When it's heated up, it's burned out. The dross is taken out, therefore you have a pure product. But before then, it's impure. You have all those impurities within the metal. It's got to go through the fire to be purified. And so in the same way, the Lord tests the hearts. We go through the fires of trial to test us, to see if we can be a genuine in the sight of God, be the genuine article, so to speak. You know, James talks about that. James chapter 1, verse 2. He says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." The fiery trials. And Peter, we talked about in 1 Peter, how he says, don't think it strange that you're going through these fiery trials. And so the Lord tests the hearts like we put metals through this firing furnace to get out its impurities, so it will be a pure product. We go through the fires of trials and difficulties to refine us, to make us better, to make us grow in Christ. You know, if we never faced any of those difficulties of life, we would never grow. We have to have those difficulties. We have to have those things for us to grow and to be put to the test, whether we're going to remain faithful. You know, God has always placed His will in front of mankind to put mankind to the test. Even in the Garden of Eden, there was a law. And even in that state of perfection, He gave a law there for them to abide by. And of course, Adam and Eve disobeyed. I mean, they had absolutely no reason. They couldn't appeal to any peer pressure or anything. They were the only ones there, except for Satan. Satan comes along and gives the temptation, and Adam and Eve gave into it. So there has to be that testing there that takes place, because God does not make us as robots. He makes us as free moral agents. And therefore, the testing takes place. And when we go through those difficult times, those trying times, it purifies us in the sense of the same way as the silver and gold is purified from its dross. Any questions or comments about the first three verses? Anything we've looked at so far? Verse 4, "An evildoer gives heed to false lips. A liar listens eagerly to a spiteful tongue." A spiteful there is a destructive tongue. An evildoer wants to listen to things, hear things that are, whether they're true or not, they're not really concerned about it, but it's something they can use in a destructive way. They take heed to false lips. They listen to these people who will speak things. A liar listens eagerly to that destructive tongue. And I'm reminded in the New Testament of how the people were bringing up false charges against Jesus. And they couldn't find anything wrong with him. Pilate said, "I find no fault in him." In fact, he said it several times. There's no fault in this man. And they started bringing up charges and said, well, he said he's going to destroy the temple. And he claims to be a king. Therefore, they were saying he's a rival to the emperor. And so they started bringing up these false charges against him. He speaks blasphemy. And so the people listened to it. And so their response was, we'll crucify him. And Pilate wanted to let him go. He saw nothing wrong with him when he examined him. But evil people like to listen to something, whether it's true or false, because they can use it. They can use it in a destructive way. Verse 5. He who mocks the poor reproaches his maker, and he who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished. When someone mocks the poor, that means they don't have compassion on the poor. They're not willing to help the poor, but they mock them. That is an insult to God. And as I've said before, when you study the Old Testament prophets, they would speak against a nation, and they would say, one of your problems is, one of your sins is you don't take care of your poor. you are neglecting the poor. You're not taking care of the widow, the orphan. You're not dealing with them properly. You're being unjust towards them. Therefore, I'm going to punish you. So the person who mocks the poor reproaches his maker, and that's God. We don't want to be ones that do that. And he who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished. We should not be glad at a person's calamity that makes them poor, or any type of calamity of anyone, any type of situation in which a person rejoices at the misfortune of others. Even if it's our enemies, we should not rejoice at their misfortune, because that reflects an attitude that's ungodly in us. We should want the very best for our enemies, and we should try to help them. That's loving our enemies. And so to rejoice at the calamity of someone is something that is contrary to the will of God, and God says that will not go unpunished. You know, when Saddam Hussein was executed, I think he got exactly what he deserved, but I couldn't really rejoice in that. I mean, that's something we couldn't really, be glad about. I think he was a very wicked man, and I think that him being executed was a just thing. However, how can we be glad because we know the future that awaits him? Exactly. How could we be glad at that? How can we rejoice at that? I mean, it's sad, and so there's nothing that should make us rejoice except someone coming to repentance, someone becoming a Christian, someone turning from sin. But to see someone getting what they deserve, that's justice, should not make us rejoice. It should sadden our heart, because that reflects an attitude in us of whether we are in tune with God's will or not. We don't want to mock the poor. We want to help the poor. The Bible makes that very clear. And we don't want to rejoice at the calamity of others. Look at verse 6. This is for grandparents. Children's children are the crown of an old man, and the glory of children is their father. The children's children are the crown of those who have children, and their children produce offspring. Grandchildren are the crowning glory of those who are older. And parents are those who rejoice in their children. The blessing of having offspring, the blessing of in seeing them grow up and become wise individuals according to the will of God, is something that is very much a blessing, and it's a crown to them. We've already seen other passages where children who don't behave correctly, that causes shame. Well, look at verse 2. A son who causes shame. The servant's going to receive his inheritance. The son that causes shame, and of course a daughter would fall into that category. That's something that's shameful. But when the children, and then the children, they grow up to be wise, godly individuals, and they produce children, and those grandchildren grow up to be wise, godly individuals, that is something to rejoice in. That is a crown of grandparents, old men, old women, those who are grandparents. Look at verse 7. Excellent speech is not becoming to a fool, but much less lying lips to a prince. This eloquent speech is not fitting for a fool. Excellent speech is eloquence. Speaking the right thing is something that's not going to come from a fool. It's going to come from a wise individual. And he talks here about a prince or a ruler, lying lips from a ruler. There is an attitude of the Bible in which someone who is in authority should be moral. Should be someone of high moral excellence. And we don't see that a lot in our politics. But they should be people who, when they say something, they actually mean it. When they take a stand on an issue, they're speaking forth the truth. That's a rare thing nowadays. But the Bible makes it very clear that a king or a ruler, someone who's a governor, someone who is going to be in a position like that, should be someone of moral integrity. And lying lips should not be coming from them. Lying words should not be coming from an individual like that. Very different picture than what we see today. Verse 8. A present is a precious stone in the eyes of its possessor. Wherever he turns, he prospers. This is something that is precious, something that's precious in the eyes of its possessor, something that you are given. Maybe it's by inheritance. This is something that is a blessing to you. It's a precious thing to you. It may not be precious to anyone else, but to you it's something that is very precious. Look at verse 9. He who covers a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates friends. Here's an individual who covers a transgression. This is someone who is going to not publicize somebody's fault. They know about it. They understand the person has a problem or a fault or a transgression, and they cover it. They keep it quiet. It's not that they are endorsing the transgression. It's not that they're tolerating it, but they're not trying to ruin the reputation of the person who's involved in that activity by spreading that word. This is not talking about something that's public, because if it was public, no one would have to know about it. They'd all know. Everyone could see it. This is something that a person knows about, and they're between two individuals, and the person who knows about it's not going to go and tell other people to make that individual look bad. That is someone who seeks love. You cover that transgression. But in contrast to that, verse 9, he who repeats a matter separates friends. You repeat it. You know about someone's fault. They come to you in confidence. They tell you about this thing, and you go and repeat it. That separates friends. That kills friendships, because that was something that was told in confidence, and you're supposed to keep that covered, keep that between you two, and then you go and you spread it. You repeat that matter. That is something that is detrimental to friendships. That's gossip. That's exactly what it is. It's gossip to tell something, and it's for the purpose of basically making that individual look bad. It's slander. It's gossip. It's nothing profitable about it. It's just some little tidbit of information that you can say to someone else, and it's usually to make the person who's telling it feel better. It kind of puts them up on a little higher scale, they think, to say, well, I know the fault of this individual, and it's just an ungodly attitude. Verse 10, rebuke is more effective for a wise man than 100 blows to a fool. It's kind of humorous. Here you have a wise individual that receives rebuke. It's a verbal rebuke. You go to that individual, you tell them a single rebuke. That person who has more understanding will heed to that rebuke, will do what the rebuke says to help him improve himself. But 100 blows there to a fool, that is actual corporal punishment in which you're inflicting pain on that individual, and they're so stubborn and hard-headed that you got to keep on inflicting the blows because they won't listen. They won't listen to rebuke, and so you got to take it to the next level, and that next level, of course, would be like in a civil government. they've got to be punished. And how many prisons are full of people who would not listen to rebuke, the warnings of the law, don't do this, don't behave this way. So because they refuse to listen to that, the warnings of the law, now they're having to be punished for their crimes as a result of not listening to rebuke because of their foolish heart. So a wise individual, as we see here, is someone who needs to be rebuked from time to time, verse 10, but they're going to listen to it. They're going to take that warning. They're going to take that constructive criticism to heart, and it's going to be effective in them. But a fool, sometimes you just got to punish them. And that's what the prisons are full of. People who won't listen to reason, will not listen to rebuke. Therefore, the punishment has to come. Look at verse 11. An evil man seeks only rebellion. Therefore, a cruel messenger will be sent against him. Here is an evil person who is seeking only rebellion. And they're going to have a cruel messenger to be sent against them. In the Old Testament, the cruel messenger sometimes took the form of whether it would be a prophet going to the individual, rebuking that individual for their rebellion, like Nathan did to King David. Jeremiah did to the other kings, or some of the other prophets did. So that cruel messenger had to be sent to tell them, look, punishment's coming. If you don't repent, punishment's coming. So this evil man is one who seeks only rebellion. And therefore, they're going to receive bad news from a messenger against him. Verse 12, let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. Again, that's a little bit humorous there. What's the danger of a bear robbed of her cubs? She'll kill you. Female bears are very dangerous when it comes to their cubs being tampered with. So that is, there's a real physical danger there. And he's saying basically it's safer to meet a bear robbed of her cubs than to confront a fool caught in his folly. You'll have a better chance of surviving a bear that is a female bear robbed of her cubs than dealing with a fool that's caught up in folly. And so the danger physically there is contrasted or compared to rather the danger of a fool in his folly. There are some people they're just dangerous, and so you just stay away from them like you would stay away from a bear. You just don't be around them. They're dangerous individuals. And so one who is caught up in folly is one like a bear robbed of her cubs. Look at verse 13. Whoever rewards evil for good, evil will not depart from his house. Here is a person who rewards evil for good. Now that's going to go along with verse 15 when we get to it. But they reward evil for good. They're going to repay with evil the good that is done. That person will not have evil depart from their house. Look at verse 14. The beginning of strife is like releasing water. Therefore, stop contention before a quarrel starts. So here he's saying when you release strife, it's like water being released. You ever have a leak? You ever have a pipe bust? You ever have a situation where water is being released? You can't get it back. Once the water is being released, you can't get it back. We one time had a problem with our above ground swimming pool. There was a puncture in it as a result of a storm. A limb fell over in it. Water was released. You can't get that water back once it's gone. And that's what he's saying here. Beginning of strife is like the releasing of water. And something that cannot be taken back. Therefore, you stop it before it gets started. Don't let it get to that point to where there's nothing that can be recovered. So he's using the words here to show that we should stop contention before this fighting begins. Nip it in the bud, we would say in our society. Stop it before it gets started. In verse 15, he who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the just, both of them alike are an abomination to the Lord. Sermon after sermon could be preached on this one verse. And it goes along with verse 13, whoever rewards evil for good, evil will not depart from his house. Justifying the wicked and he who condemns the just. I'm reminded of Isaiah chapter 5. Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20. God says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Verse 21 says, woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. It's exactly what is being said here in verse 15. You justify the wicked and you condemn the just. That is an abomination to God. And that is reflecting the attitude of our society so much. What is our society trying to do? You see it on the talk shows all the time. Justify homosexuality. You justify it. And you're the bad guy if you speak against it. You're the unloving, you're a bigot. You are wicked if you say that it should be a man and a woman. You get into one of these talk shows and you stand up and you actually take a stand on the basic principle of men and women should marry. You'll be booed. You'll be labeled as someone that's prejudiced. You're homophobic. You are the bad guy if you take a stand against homosexuality. And that's just one example of several. Because our world and Hollywood and they justify the wicked and they condemn the just. They're exchanging good for evil and evil for good. And so when the just speak forth, they're going to be condemned as the wicked. You're the bad guy. You're evil. If you have the audacity to say a man and a woman should be married. But that's how it should be. Well, that's exactly what he's saying here. They justify the wicked and they condemn the just. So you become the bad guy. They are condemned. That's an abomination to the Lord. You bring it over into the realm of the church. If you stand up and say, look, this is how the Bible teaches concerning worship, well, you're a legalist. You're one of those Pharisees telling me that we can't do this. We can't bring in the instrument. We can't take the Lord's Supper any day of the week that we want to. You're a Pharisee. So they condemn the just and they justify the wicked. But that's how people are. And that's an abomination to the Lord. And we must stand for what is right. If everyone is against it, it doesn't make us wrong if we're standing for what is according to God's will. Because those who justify those who are wicked are an abomination.
John, did you see this on TV about some of the major denominations for Super Bowl Sunday, what they're doing for that?
I haven't heard.
The NFL has got on that for rebroadcasting, I guess is a better way to describe it, football game for services.
Mm-hmm. They're showing it instead of having services. Right. That's how our society is. This is a high and holy day for NFL. It's a high. This is a high and holy day, and these churches of men, the denominations, make it a part of their worship, basically. And so it's a merger of the secular with religious thinking to put it together. And if you have the audacity to say, you should be worshiping God and putting that first before the Super Bowl, you're seen as ridiculous or radical, and as being someone that's just out of touch. But there are some things in this world that's more important than the Super Bowl and who wins it. But see, that's the religion of our society right there. Sports is basically the religion of our society. And the denominations who want to please people, and they know that the people are fixated on sports, will try to incorporate that into their system of things. So,
how would you feel if the Lord came right in the middle of the Super Bowl and he didn't go to church?
Exactly. That's what I often thought. What are all these people going to do when that trumpet blows and he comes with his holy angels? Who wins the Super Bowl will not matter one iota on that day. It won't matter. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're talking about the entertainment center.
Yeah.
Some of them laugh, some of them don't like it.
That's what it is. It's entertainment. It's religious entertainment, and it's just basically social clubs to entertain people. And yes.
Watching the news today and it was on gambling. I didn't realize that the draft was gambling.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of churches have that.
There's a lot of churches that involve themselves in football raffles, things like that, and it's a form of gambling. And I doubt there are very few churches here in Royse City that would actually speak out against even playing the lottery. I doubt very few would even do that because of how our society is.
Did you see the film about the kids in the high school to the teenagers? And it's in Royse City, and it was one girl from this another girl from controversy about it. Just another lesbian, and she's not afraid to speak out.
That goes along. Yeah, that goes along. I didn't see it. I'm not in high school,
No,
but that
it's
is.
on the news.
Oh.
They showed the film on the news.
Oh no, I didn't see that. They showed the actual clip of it.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't see that, but that goes along with verse 15. If you speak out against that, you're condemned in our society. If you have the audacity to say that that's sinful, and you speak out, it's like some of these teenagers want to go to prom with their same gender partner as a date. And if anyone speaks out against it, they're the bad guys. They're the bad people. That's exactly what verse 15 is talking about. You justify the wicked and you condemn the just. That's an abomination to God. Look at verse 16. Why is there in the hand of a fool the purchase price of wisdom, since he has no heart for it? Here is a person who is a fool. One paraphrase of that verse says this: it is senseless to pay tuition to educate a fool who has no heart for wisdom. Kind of talking about, why would you spend the time to purchase the price of wisdom for a fool? They're not going to use it. They're not going to benefit from that. So it's one of those things where you're kind of wasting your money on a certain thing in that regard. Look at verse 17. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Here you have a situation where true friendship is being pictured. A friend is always loyal, and a brother is born to help in a time of need. This is the closeness of a friend, that they love all the time. They have a love. They don't just love at certain times, and then when they get their feathers ruffled and things don't go well, friendship's over. That's not a friendship. A friend loves all the time, and even when there's difficulty, they are born for adversity. There's a proverb that says that a friend sticks closer than a brother in some cases. So there's a closeness there to true friendship, and a true friend is a friend all the time, not just sometimes. Verse 18 says, a man devoid of understanding shakes hands in a pledge and becomes surety for his friend. This is the concept of co-signing for a friend's note. You become responsible for the neighbor's debt when you do that. They shake hands. A man devoid of this understanding here, who's unwise, they shake hands in a pledge, and then they become a liability or a surety for his friend. This is someone that you cannot rely upon, and they have a debt, and then you wind up having to pay that debt. And that's a person that you need to not enter into an agreement with that has that type of void in their life, so to speak, with understanding. And in verse 19, he who loves transgression loves strife, and he who exalts his gate seeks destruction. Here's a person who is, they love to fight. They love to quarrel. And anyone who speaks boastfully invites disaster, destruction into their life. This is someone who loves strife. They love to be involved in stirring up situations that are contrary to peace. They're involved in those things, and that's someone who is inviting, and they're seeking for destruction. Look at verse 20. He who has a deceitful heart finds no good, and he who has a perverse tongue falls into evil. A deceitful heart and a perverse tongue. Of course, that deceitful heart will bring forth a perverse speech out of the mouth. They will find no good. Their heart is deceitful. They have a deceitful mind, and therefore, as some translations say, it's crooked. They find no good. That is the result of their heart. And their perverse tongue falls into evil. Look at verse 21. He who begets a scoffer does so to his own sorrow, and the father of a fool has no joy. Here is a parent who begets or produces a child, and they turn out to be a scoffer, and it brings sorrow. And they don't have joy in a fool. That's in contrast to what we've seen earlier in verse 6, where it talks about the glory of children as their father, and the children's children are the crown of an old man. Here you have these children who are living right. They're living as they should. And so that is a crown to an older individual, older grandparents. But here is someone who begets a scoffer, one who openly mocks God, openly mocks religion. That brings sorrow. And a father of a fool does not have joy. And then the next verse, and we will stop with the next verse. A merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. Here is, once again, we see the concept of a merriment and being positive and being joyful. The good that it does good like a medicine. And so it's one of those positive things that helps a person out physically. And again, medical science is just now catching up to what the Bible has always said. People who have a joyful merriment about them recover quickly in hospitals. than those who are in despair, those who are really hopeless. They take longer to physically recover because there is a connection there with the mind and the body. And so they even talked about the medical benefits of laughter. How that laughter has all kinds of medical benefits to our body. Merry heart does good like medicine. And so that laughter and that joy, it has a positive impact on our physical well-being. But the opposite of that, verse 22, a broken spirit, it just dries an individual up, saps them of all their strength. It goes right down to their very bones, dries them up in the bones. Here's a person that their spirit is broken, depressed, and there's nothing that brings them any merriment in their heart, any joy, and so they're just a dried up individual. But the merry heart does good. And here, the opposite of that broken spirit does bad and causes all kinds of medical problems, depression, and things like that. Yes? Right. It helps the situation. And here's one thing too that you'll also find. You'll find it at funerals. You talk about the one who's deceased. Talk about the things, the funny little quirky things that they've done. And what do you start hearing? Laughter. Just reflecting back on that individual. And that helps the grieving process. That helps the individual get through it. And thinking about Grandpa passing away and just thinking about our loved ones pass away, I think, what do atheists do? They have absolutely no belief in an afterlife and no belief in anything. When you're all gone, when you're dead, how can they have any joy or any positive reflection at a funeral or anything? I mean, we have such a joy in knowing the promises of God for the faithful who die. And then you reflect back on their life, and the things that they've done, and that helps get through that grieving process. So
that saying, Rover is dead all over.
Right, that's what they believe. And so there's no really any difference in us and animals in their thinking. And so the merriment of the heart, how could they be merry? Everything's gone. Everything about them is gone in their thinking. But just being over at Jennifer's parents' house just yesterday, you hear laughter. Just the joy of talking about, Grandpa and the little quirky things that he did and the life that he lived. And so there's that laughter. There was the time for the tears. But, the merry heart does so much good. And again, that's one of those things that science is just now coming to realize the Bible has said for thousands of years. So we'll continue our study in Proverbs next week, Lord willing.